Si je sais, j'habite au Canada. Hai, Tausch, 어르신 보여서 요셉 원인다 servo Canadien Yosi Si je sais, j'habite au Canada.
So I wanted to talk about levels. When it comes to language learning or language acquisition, whichever side you go into, there's a lot of what feels like I guess like a kind of like a latching on to the old systems. And I've never felt that way. I've never felt like, right? So basically what this is just kind of what I myself, I'm not claiming that this is a fact, I'm claiming this is what works for me. So why levels don't exist? First of all, there's this assumption that when you think about levels, you think about, okay, so there's this level. Like when it comes to languages, for those who are familiar with the European, what they call Central European Framework of Reference, or is it something common European Framework of Reference? There's this A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, right? Okay, so there's levels. Great. It helps us to kind of categorize things, and these are stepping stones. This is normal for being, human. The other thing is, though, we're not just human. Personally, for me, I've always found it very constricting. When it comes to levels, it feels like, okay, so I'm A1, so that means I know nothing, right? But that's not true. Because for me, when we're to believe that we're born with nothing, that whole like tabula rasa, you've heard of this before. I don't know if you've heard of it. It means like you come in empty. That's just believing that the same conditioning we went through for thousands of years, or at least hundreds, where we treat children like there's nothing. So they're there for us to mold. I don't believe in that. I believe that there's always something there. There's a conditioning we think we should impose on children because we think this is what we needs to be because of the system that is. Right? There are people who are still holding on to that. I don't believe in that. I'm not holding on to it. So whenever I would teach music, for example, I would ask them, like, how does it feel? I would kind of encourage them to do that. I didn't really know how to do it, to be honest with you, because I don't really know myself. I've had to learn on the way, and that's how I've been learning. But that's what's exciting. When you learn on the way, when I say learn, I don't mean like studying it, and this is the information you get, and this is what happens, right? I don't believe in that whole thing where you have to study the manual and then you practice it. That's not the way life really works. There's a reason why, and this is just going to be something I'm interjecting for those who know astrology. There's a reason why there's a precession, there's an order where earth comes before air. You always have experience first before you get knowledge. Because how else do you get the knowledge in the first place? Think about it. Came out of thin air? Literally, air. Is it came out of thin air? No. Did not. It came from experience. How do you know how to drive a car unless you knew how to drive a car? You go into it. Now, when it comes to languages, it doesn't work that way. It's not about just speaking. People have this perception that it's like, when we speak, it's all like, that's what leads to speaking. But you see this time and time and time and time and time and time and time again, that when people try to speak a language from the very get-go, there's just force. There's just a force. It's just like you might as well spank the child until their asses bleed. Pardon me, this is going to be quite, unpopular belief, or whatever you want to call it. But it's like the same thing. It's like, drilling. It's like you might as well drill a hole in people's skulls to believe that's like, oh, you must do it this way, because that's the way it's been for a long time. It's been for a long time. If you look at the history of all this stuff, it's not been for a long time. The whole grammar thing first came around 500 years ago, or give or take a few decades. I think around there, when universities started becoming more, I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm not saying that grammar is wrong. Don't get me wrong. It's just well, you can if you want to. But the way I've come to experience it is that when we look at grammar first, what happens if you really process it? Think about the process. Instead of looking at it just like, oh, this is just the way it is, I'm just going to submit to it. This is what it is. Try it for yourself. Go 10 years. Try 10 years. And I'm expressing this with a lot of passion. Okay, I'm not trying to insult anybody's intelligence. I'm not trying to do any of that stuff, right? And again, this is an unpopular belief, right? But wait, so when you do the grammar thing first, what happens is like you saw it in a previous video. I made a post. I talked about how we go through reading first. Was it writing first and then reading? And then speaking and then listening. It's the opposite of what is natural. And who's to say what's natural? Well, children. What were we first in this linear timeline? What were we first? Children first, right? How did we acquire our mother tongue? The way we do as children. We just listen for the most part. Or at least we keep doing that. It still happens. Listening is part of the whole process. I know that a lot of people don't really, what do you call this? They don't really adhere to this. They don't really feel like they resonate with it, especially even if it's coming from me. That's totally fine. I get it, but I wanted to just really express out there. This is for me something that has never really worked. I did it for years before I switched over and just it wasn't even switching to the whole idea of Stephen Cratchit's language acquisition stuff. It's not about that. I realized that it was more than that. So this belief that children or toddlers, we are born with nothing is a complete lie. Okay? When we're born with nothing, it means that nothing, meaning to the human egoic perspective, that it's like, oh, you have nothing, you don't know anything, I'm better than you because I'm an adult because this is what I know. And that's a very boxed in perspective, isn't it? Process it before you respond, right? So I wrote here that it's nothing, that is not the things created here in this form, because it's a very egocentric perspective. It's egocentric. It's anthropocentric. It's just very this kind of world, as if this is the only thing that exists. Logically speaking, that doesn't even make sense. How can we be the only thing that ever exists? Whatever your background is, I respect that. But for me, that's never been the case. I've never, even now as I speak, sometimes I wonder, it's like, what is that idiom I was just wondering about? What is that thing I was supposed to say? I can't express it because I grew up in a family where there was a lot of confusion with communication. I grew up bilingual, but at the same time, and this has nothing to do with being bilingual either. I feel like sometimes there's this desire to want to perfect things, desire to know exactly what it is. But that's where it comes from. This imposition, this conditioning that we have to know things before doing something. We have to know what it is. We can't just trust it. That's the key thing, right? Trust. But how do you trust? You go back into your childlikeness. You go back into the past. You go back into that shadow work stuff. For those who don't know what that is, look up shadow work. Look up shadow work done by Teal Swan. Look up shadow work done by Debbie Ford. These are the two that I personally have come to really respect and honor and be like, okay, wow, their stuff really works. Because shadow work is going back into the memories of the childhood. How does it tie into the language stuff? It does. Everything is connected. I think more and more people are seeing that. And if that's fine. If you don't see it right now, that's totally fine. You can shut it off, go to another channel, whatever you want to do. Right? The other thing the number 2 reason why levels don't exist. They do exist in this form, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not something we can rely on. But a lot of people rely on levels. A lot of people rely on, we have to have this structure, and it has to be this way. Well, there is a structure. It's called buildings. There is structure. But when it comes to, if you really want to know, if you really want communication, if you want that fluency, we're not talking perfect. This isn't about, I know 10 million words. No. I mean, you can say exactly what you want to say without having to overthink it. Like, this is right here. This is fluency. When you speak your mind. You speak whatever comes out, right? It's not having to think about it, right? It's rooted in the subconscious area of the brain, but it's more than that. But I don't want to go off track too much here. So the other one is this belief that we're born with absolutely nothing. Well, that's true, but we don't have the things in this life. That's what it means by nothing. But we are born with this intelligence. And what is that intelligence? To be able to absorb, to be able to understand. How do you think we acquired our mother tongue in the first place? Now people are probably thinking, well, that's a child thing. Is it? Is it? Is it just a child thing? Is it a child thing only? Or have we just forgotten? Okay. Number 2. Once past the level, we're done. So in that case, it's perfect, right? It's perfect. So it's perfect means you're done. So you have a C2 level. Let's say you have a C2 level. You've been granted C2 level. Yay, congratulations. Then what? No more life? No more living? I mean, that is a system, right? So this is what I mean by that. I know people understand this. It's like, oh, well, once you're done the level, once you've graduated from school, as if it's like, that's it. No, it's not it. I want to keep going here, though. The other thing is that the third thing is that boxes, labels, containers, words, etc., things that kind of constrict, they have a reason for them, right? There's a reason for them. They're all stepping stones. Eckhart puts it as they are stepping stones. Words are stepping stones. But what are stepping stones? If you look at steps, like steps, when you go up the stairs, right? Where is the real beginning and the real end? Like, we're looking at it figuratively speaking. Of course, in a real staircase, you have a staircase, you go, right? There's the bottom, there's the top, right? But in terms of even if it's figuratively speaking, if it's figuratively speaking, if it's energetically speaking, let's say, right? Where is the beginning and the end? So this is it. This is what I mean by it. This is the egocentric. This is the anthropocentric view that because of the bodies we're limited in this form, that everything else in this body is exactly what we should abide by. As in, rely on, abide by, follow, stick to, and that's it. No more, nothing outside the box. Right? Because there's fear of going outside the box. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what's I don't know what it is. Oh my God, I can't be more than a native speaker. I can be a native speaker. Oh my God, that's scary. It's ridiculous to think about it that it's why would you be scared of being a native speaker? Wouldn't that be a desire? Well, that's the thing. There's another layer to this. The whole idea of the term native speaker, meaning that your language, the language that you speak, is something you were born with. It's not actually, it's just a term, right? It just means that that's the language you were born with. When I say native speaker in this case, I mean the fluency of the language that you get similar to that of a native speaker. So what it is really, the labels go out the door when you start to realize that it all comes down to a very simple thing. connection. When I say connection, I mean this you can call it spiritual. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it esoteric. Doesn't matter. The point is the connection to energy is tied to exactly why. I've said this in several old videos before. I'm reiterating it because I feel like this. For me, it's something that's important, and for me, it's something that is. I love culture. I love connecting with people, and that's really what it is, right? Why do we have language in the first place? Why do we want language? Because maybe there's opportunity, and because of the job. Okay, that's a practical approach, right? Maybe there's there's this one, person who speaks this language. Or maybe because you just want to travel, or you want to explore, you want to experience. But at the same time, it's all a tool, right? Language is a tool. But if we go beyond that, and deeper than that at the same time, we'll see that it's like, okay, so language is a tool. How is it a tool? Because if you look at, let's say, that's the difference between, let's say, compare something that I know. Let's say, I'm not going to claim I know this, but let's say, for example, the culture I grew up with, or kind of partially exposed to, was like Filipino, for example, right? The way the culture behaves, the way they behave is a certain way, right? So sorry, I was doing this whole, whatever that is. So, the way they behave is a certain way. There are some things that I don't get about it because I've assimilated more into the mixed American-Canadian culture. So sometimes there's their behaviors, sometimes I just don't get it. But that's okay. And that's part of the whole thing. If you look at Asian Americans or Canadian Asians, they'll tell you that it's like there's some things about their heritage that it's like that doesn't make sense, right? And that's okay. So the point I'm making here is that why levels don't exist is because when I say exist, I mean because we rely on them, right? Until today, there are people who are still relying on that stuff. And that is that for me. It's not because it's bad or good. It's just it's slow, right? It's kind of like saying I want to grow, but you only grow up to this height. Like you literally have this sort of you're gonna have like a growth stunt. You have like this sort of it's almost like this spine. There's a connection between your spine and here, and you're never going to grow, or something like that. Some kind of tool that lets you. I'm only going to be 5'11", which is my height, by the way. So 5'11", it's like, and that's it. I'm never going to grow. Or if you're a child, you say, oh, you're only going to grow up to like 3 feet tall, because that's what we say you should grow as. You see how it is? I don't know if people are getting this, but people are only now awakening to it. But the thing is, this has been around for a long time. It's just that the human consciousness, the human perception of things has kind of just been growing now. And I think that we're ready to understand it's like this whole language learning thing is not effective. It might have been effective before when it was just all like, oh, when we communicate with each other, it's all like this and that. But in my experience, that's part of the reason why people get into things like, not get into, but why there's racism. Because if you look at, like, at least from my experience, if I look at someone who doesn't know how to speak English that well, for example, there would be this sort of internal judgment going on. I was watching this other video, just like, most people don't care, but the people who do care I used to be one of those people, or at least more before. And the reason I did that is because of my own issues, not because the person was doing anything wrong. But you see what I mean? So, but I'm not saying that we should be fluent so that we don't get bullied or that we don't get judged. No. You're going to get it regardless. And because of the people that have their own wounding. Hurt people, right? Hurt people. So, but the point is, like, do you want to feel good about yourself? Do you want to feel good about your accomplishments? Right? And it's quite simple. And I'm going to put it simply. So I've already stated out my reasons for why levels don't exist. Okay? But now I'm going to say that it's like, I, as a language teacher, I've seen this time and time and time and time and time and time and time again. People tell me, my students, even now, the work I'm working, they keep wondering, like, I get students that are like, I don't feel good about speaking English. My speaking is like the worst thing ever, But the thing is, because that's it, right? They're forcing it. I don't know how to first deeply explain this without going too deep, where it's just like, the reason why speaking for the sake of speaking, or speaking so that we get more fluent in speaking, doesn't work, is because, I'm supposed to make this for another video, but I wanted to say it now, is because when we're speaking, when we're speaking for the sake of speaking, meaning like to get fluent, it's this assumption that when we're speaking, it's equated to learning how to drive from driving. When we're talking about language, like speaking, that's the expression. It's kind of like it's the external, the output. It's called in linguistics the output. When you have output coming out, when you have output going on, what happens is that that's just expression. When it comes to a second language, even if it's your first language, right? Think about it. Think about it for a second. Process this. Literally process this. I beg of you. Okay. When a child, a 2-year-old child, a 3-year-old child, we think that they can't speak because they just don't have the ability to speak. Actually, they do. They just don't know what to say yet. But what they need to do is they need to understand what to say in the first place. But to understand what to say first, they need to understand what's going on. This is why Stephen Cratchit calls us the comprehensible input. But you see a lot of videos out there who are just stuck on comprehensible input, as if that is it. As if that is it. And it's like, okay, there's comprehensible input. And then they translate. What happens with translation? Think about it for a second. What happens with translation? Right? Again, this is for another video, but so when you have translation, what happens? You get the information, but you understand it in your own language, in the language that you actually acquired. When I say acquired, it's something that you deeply understand. For example, you saw something and your brain associated that experience with that concept and it put it all together. And it's like, oh, that's what it is. But underneath that is the behavior around it, the collective and individual perception of it and the behavior around it. So for example, in Filipino we have this concept called naman. I can't translate that. Even if I were to translate it, how the hell are you supposed to understand how to use it in the first place? You see what I mean? All we get is the knowing of things, not the understanding. But you cannot understand it, you cannot really know it until you understand it first. Knowing it is easy. Knowing it is going okay, so this is the knowledge. This is the information we're getting. And then we just apply it? Is it that simple? So what happens, you communicate with somebody. Ask a native speaker. Ask them to be really blunt with you. Be direct and honest with you. Ask them to do it and say, do you think you really understand what I'm trying to say? Yes, they would say yes, they would. But there's something missing there. Something missing there. It's that familiarity that comes with, here's that keyword, familiarity with what they've acquired in their tongue. Let's say I'm speaking to someone in German. Even if I didn't have that exact fluency, but I knew how to use a concept, they would be surprised, how did you understand how to use that? Right? This isn't about wording, this isn't about idioms, this isn't about phrases, this isn't about phrasables, this isn't about sentences, this isn't about paragraphs, this isn't about any of that stuff. Literally just the understanding. So if I got it and understood the concept, like naman, for example, in Tagalog, ano naman ang gagawin niya? Translated, that would be well then what is he gonna do? See, I translate the word then would probably be that. But then if I use it in other cases, bigyan mo naman ako. I see that, I've heard that all the time. It's like, could you, I see, I can't translate it. I would be like, the closest I would get to is, please, would you be so kind as to include me in your thoughts and like offer me what you have. See, right there, lost in translation. Why? Because when we just get the information, the definition of it, the dictionary, the thesaurus, the Urban Dictionary, whatever, of that concept, even if you look at dialects, even if you look at examples, it's not enough. There has to be a holistic, I guess that's not really what the word holistic means, but you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's a really like a whole embodiment. At the very least, the five senses are all included in that interaction. So there you go. Yeah. And personally for me, I avoid translation unless I need to. Like, it's a kind of like a means to an end. And that's for another time. To me, translation is another thing. But anyways, I hope that makes sense. I didn't use it. I used my blackboard here, or whiteboard, sorry, to kind of let you explain. But I just wanted to express that it's like levels don't exist in the grand scheme of things. But you know, you can only really experience it yourself, right? If your people were honest with themselves, they would know that it's like the old system doesn't work. The old system doesn't work. Okay, it just doesn't work. You can be stubborn all you want. You can comment down in the section all you want. You can do exactly what you want because you're trying to defend that you're right. I'm not trying to defend whether I'm right or wrong. I'm not doing anything. For me, I'm voicing out exactly what, for me, I feel will help humanity move forward. At the very least, how we communicate with each other. Because it's all about communication, right? I mean, on the surface level, it's communication. It's connection, right? So this is, again, to reiterate, this isn't about perfection. Fluency isn't perfection. In fact, it's the opposite. Fluency is just going with the flow of life and enjoying it, right? And really like, let's go, okay, so that's fine. You didn't know this, right? So there are things that native speakers can do, that we all can do, so that we're not trying to correct and chide and punish and correct, and you know, because subconsciously the corrections don't work either. Again, that's for another. But thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later.